Imagine thinking you're better than someone, only to find out they have more power than you could ever dream of. Today's story begins with a wealthy socialite who publicly slapped a black woman in front of a shocked crowd. What she didn't know: that woman was the wife of a billionaire CEO, and her entire world was about to flip upside down. The night of the charity gala glittered with chandeliers and whispers of power. It was an evening where wealth was on display, where diamonds shone brighter than stars, and where everyone wanted to be seen. Among the crowd were Veronica Kingsley, a socialite who carried herself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world revolved around her. She wore jewels like armor, her laughter loud enough to demand attention, her presence commanding yet cold. Across the hall, a woman in a simple but elegant black gown quietly entered. Her name was Maya. She wasn't there to flaunt herself, but her grace made heads turn regardless. She moved with quiet dignity, avoiding the spotlight, content in her own calm. But to Veronica, Maya seemed out of place. She didn't recognize her face, and in Veronica's world, anyone unfamiliar was automatically beneath her. With a snap of her fingers, Veronica called Maya over as if she were staff. She ordered her to fetch a drink, her words dripping with condescension. Maya looked at her, unshaken, and replied softly, "I'm not staff. You should be more careful with your words." The room quieted for just a moment at Maya's calm defiance. Veronica's face twisted with rage. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman she assumed was beneath her. In a burst of arrogance, she raised a hand and slapped Maya across the face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like lightning. Gasps filled the air, conversations halted, and the weight of silence settled on every guest. Maya stood tall, her expression steady, her composure unbroken. She didn't retaliate. Her silence carried more weight than any scream ever could. Veronica smirked, convinced she had humiliated her. But then, the doors opened. A tall man entered, his presence commanding immediate respect. Jordan Ellison, Billionaire CEO and one of the most powerful men in the world, walked past stunned guests without acknowledging them. His eyes locked only on Maya. Reaching her side, he gently took her hand, kissed it, and said, "I'm sorry I kept you waiting, darling." Murmurs rippled through the room. "Darling?" The whispers grew louder as Jordan turned to face the guests. Placing his arm protectively around Maya, he declared, "Allow me to introduce my wife." Shock spread like fire. Veronica's smug expression melted into horror. The woman she had just humiliated wasn't a servant. She was married to one of the most influential men alive. The color drained from her face as reality crashed down. Guests pulled away from her, unwilling to be tainted by her arrogance. Phones recorded every second, ensuring her humiliation would never be forgotten. Stammering, she tried to explain herself, but Jordan's cold stare silenced her. His words were simple, yet final. "You thought wrong." From that moment, Veronica's world unraveled. The video went viral overnight. Across social media, millions watched her arrogance exposed and her downfall begin. Brands she once represented dropped her. Former friends distanced themselves. Even her family publicly condemned her behavior. She became a pariah, a woman whose name was now synonymous with entitlement and disgrace. Meanwhile, Maya never spoke publicly about the incident. Her silence became her power. People admired her calm dignity in the face of cruelty. Invitations poured in, asking her to speak about resilience and respect. Reluctantly at first, then with purpose, she stepped into the spotlight on her own terms. She launched foundations for young women, championed education, and became a voice of strength for those who felt unseen. Her elegance and restraint turned her into a global inspiration. Veronica, meanwhile, tried to repair her image, but the world never forgot. Every apology sounded hollow, every attempt at redemption rejected. Her wealth dwindled, her influence disappeared, and her name lived only as a warning. The once celebrated socialite faded into isolation. Her downfall studied in business schools and whispered about in social circles as a cautionary tale. Years later, when asked about that night, Maya gave only one response. "It wasn't my slap to carry, it was Hayes." Those words carried across the world, a reminder that cruelty always leaves its mark, not on the victim, but on the one who delivers it. The story lived on as more than gossip. It became a legend, a parable told to children, studied in classrooms, and remembered by leaders. The lesson was simple yet timeless. Respect is the truest form of wealth. Arrogance fades, money crumbles, but dignity endures. And when pride strikes against grace, grace always wins. The scandal should have ended there, with Veronica disgraced and Maya triumphant. But fate rarely closes a chapter so neatly. In the weeks that followed, the world buzzed with chatter. The video of the slap was replayed endlessly, dissected by news anchors and influencers alike. Everyone had an opinion, and every headline seemed to sharpen the divide between arrogance and grace. Yet beneath the noise, something deeper was stirring. For Veronica, the humiliation became unbearable. She avoided the public, retreating into a mansion as paparazzi circled like vultures. But shame was a fire that burned even in silence. Every time she opened her phone, she was confronted by her own downfall. Memes mocking her face, articles branding her the slap queen, strangers flooding her inbox with messages dripping in scorn. Her pride, once towering, collapsed brick by brick until she barely recognized herself. But resentment is a dangerous seed, and in Veronica's heart, it grew. Instead of reflection, she turned to bitterness. She began to obsess over Maya, blaming her for everything. In Veronica's twisted view, Maya had stolen her life, her reputation, her crown. And slowly, thought by thought, her bitterness hardened into resolve. If she could not rebuild her old empire, perhaps she could destroy the woman who had become its opposite. Maya, meanwhile, was adjusting to a new life of constant attention. She had never sought fame, but now the world looked to her as a symbol. Her inbox was filled with letters from young women, strangers thanking her for her composure, students calling her their role model. Invitations arrived daily to conferences, galas, even political events. Yet through it all, Maya remained grounded. She told her husband, "This isn't about me, Jordan. It's about what people saw that night, what they needed to see." Jordan, ever the protector, worried for her safety. With fame came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came danger. He doubled security around their home, arranged for bodyguards at public events, and kept a close eye on anyone who came too close. But even he couldn't predict how far Veronica's obsession might reach. One evening, as Maya prepared for a keynote speech at a global summit, she received an anonymous package. Inside was a single white glove, the kind one might wear at a gala. But across its surface, in dark red ink, was a single word, unfinished. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't tell Jordan immediately, not wanting to distract him before the summit. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Veronica had vanished from the tabloids, but she hadn't vanished from the story. In the shadows, she was plotting. She had lost her crown, yes, but not her cunning. She knew the world adored Maya, and she also knew the world loved nothing more than watching idol fall. If she couldn't win back her place by rising higher, she would drag Maya down into the ashes with her. As the summit approached, Maya stood before thousands, her voice steady and powerful. Cameras broadcast her every word to millions across the globe. "Respect," she said, "is the greatest currency we hold. When we spend it wisely, we build a richer world. When we waste it, we bankrupt ourselves." The whole erupted in applause. But somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, Veronica watched the speech on her television, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. Her lips curled into a smile that was nothing like joy. "Enjoy your moment, Maya," she whispered to the screen, "because I'm not done." The night of Maya's speech at the global summit was supposed to be a celebration. Her words carried across nations, echoed in headlines, and inspired countless young people. Jordan stood proudly by her side, certain that together they had not only survived a scandal but transformed it into a movement. For many, that would have been the end of the story, but life rarely closes its doors so neatly. Veronica was far from gone. In the shadows of her exile, she had begun to rebuild, not in society's bright circles but in its underbelly. Cut off from her old allies, she sought out new ones, bitter rivals of Jordan Allison's empire, people who had long been waiting for a chance to see him fall. To them, Veronica wasn't a disgraced socialite. She was a weapon, sharp with humiliation, desperate enough to risk anything. They promised her influence, wealth, and revenge if she would play her part. Weeks later, as Maya and Jordan attended a gala in Geneva, whispers began to follow them again. Strange headlines appeared in obscure blogs, Accusations that Maya was not who she claimed to be, insinuations that she had used Jordan's name to build her foundation. At first, the couple dismissed it. Lies, they thought, desperate rumors. But then the stories grew louder. Anonymous sources, falsified documents, cleverly edited videos, a storm of deception that suddenly threatened to undo everything Maya had worked to build. Jordan knew someone was orchestrating the attacks. Maya, ever calm, told him not to worry. Truth always outlasts lies, she said softly. But in the quiet of the night, as she sat at a desk reading hateful messages from strangers, she wondered if a silence would be enough this time. Unlike the slap, which revealed itself in plain sight, these shadows were invisible, poisonous, and hard to fight. Meanwhile, Veronica watched with satisfaction. Each headline, each cruel whisper was a balm to her wounded pride. She convinced herself that this was justice, that Maya had stolen her world and now she was simply taking it back. But even as she plotted, there was a hollowness in her victories, because deep inside she knew that no amount of revenge could erase the truth of that night. Still, the war had begun, and as Maya prepared to address yet another gathering, this time of world leaders and entrepreneurs, she could feel it in her bones. The slap had been only the first act. What followed would be darker, more dangerous, and more costly than anyone could imagine. She stood before the mirror, adjusting her gown, her reflection calm but her thoughts racing. She whispered to herself, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about what comes next." In the distance, thunder rolled, and somewhere, far from the glittering lights of the gala, Veronica raised a glass in a private toast. "To round two," she murmured, her eyes gleaming. The storm that gathered after Veronica's disgrace should have faded, but instead it began to grow. Her slap was no longer just an isolated scandal. It had become a symbol, one the world couldn't stop talking about. In coffee shops and classrooms, in newsrooms and boardrooms, people debated dignity, power, and arrogance. And in that endless storm of voices, Veronica realized something terrible. She had been forgotten as a person. She was no longer Veronica Kingsley. She was a woman who slapped. Her nights became long and restless. She paced her empty mansion, each room echoing her loneliness. Her mirrors reflected only shame. And yet, her pride whispered that she still had one weapon left, her hatred. It hardened inside her until it became a purpose. She convinced herself that Maya had stolen her crown, and if Maya's rise was built on dignity, then Veronica would destroy it piece by piece. While Veronica plotted in shadows, Maya and Jordan were climbing into a new world of influence. The foundation Maya had built grew larger than she ever imagined. It began in quiet classrooms, offering scholarships to girls who had been overlooked. But soon it expanded into hospitals, mentorship programs, and even international projects. Newspapers began calling her the Quiet Power. At first, Maya resisted the title. She told Jordan, "I never wanted to be a symbol." But Jordan only smiled. "Symbols choose us. Love. All we can do is carry them with grace." But symbols attract enemies, and soon cracks began to appear around them. It started with rumors. Anonymous blogs accused Maya of hypocrisy, claiming her charity was secretly funded by unethical businesses. Fake screenshots of bank statements circulated online. News outlets, hungry for scandal, picked up the stories without checking the truth. People who had once praised her now asked questions. At events, she felt the shift. Polite smile that hid suspicion, handshakes that no longer lingered with warmth. Jordan launched investigations, but the lies were slippery, spreading faster than truth could catch them. Maya's heart ached, not for herself, but for the young women who relied on her foundation. "If they lose trust in me," she whispered late one night, "they'll lose trust in the work too." And in a dark apartment across the city, Veronica smiled as she read the headlines. She had found allies in Jordan's competitors, men and women who envied his empire and saw Maya as a perfect target. They funded her campaign of whispers, feeding her documents and strategies. With each rumor, each poisoned headline, Veronica felt alive again. She told herself she wasn't just fighting for revenge. She was fighting for her place in a world that had abandoned her. Yet something unexpected began to happen. The more Veronica tried to destroy Maya, the more Maya's true strength began to shine. When others would have lashed out, Maya remained calm. When others would have defended themselves with anger, She stood with quiet resilience. Instead of giving speeches about the lies, she gave speeches about truth. Instead of answering hatred, she doubled down on compassion, and people began to notice. The whispers didn't vanish, but beneath them, a new narrative grew stronger, that Maya's grace under fire was proof of her integrity. Still, Veronica wasn't finished. She had a final plan, one far darker than rumors. She whispered it only to her new allies, her voice low, her eyes cold. If the world won't see her fall on its own, then we'll make it fall with her. The stage was set for something far bigger than a slap, far bigger than whispers. What began as a scandal in a ballroom was becoming a war, one that would test dignity, power, and love against the sharpest edge of vengeance. And as Maya prepared to speak at her next international summit, she felt it in her bones. The night of the slap had only been the beginning. The city was alive with whispers the morning after Maya's latest summit speech. Reporters praised her poise, her ability to rise above attacks with grace. Yet beneath the applause was unease. Everyone sensed that something darker was approaching, though no one could name it. In their penthouse, Jordan stood by the glass window, scanning the skyline with a mind sharpened by decades of business battles. He knew the rhythm of power. When you rise too fast, enemies gather like storms on the horizon. He turned to Maya, who sat at her desk reading letters from young women her foundation had helped. Her calmness steadied him, but he couldn't ignore the tightness in his chest. "They are coming for us harder," he said quietly. Maya looked up. Her voice was soft, but resolute. "Then let them come. The truth is stronger than lies." But even she could not have imagined how deep Veronica's obsession had grown. Across the ocean, in a private estate in France, Veronica sat with her new patrons, a circle of powerful figures who despised Jordan Allison's dominance in the tech world. They spoke in hushed tones, drawing maps of influence, plotting not only to smear Maya's reputation, but to destabilize the entire Allison empire. Veronica listened, her heart racing with a thrill of relevance. For the first time in months, she wasn't a disgraced socialite. She was their insider, their weapon. Late that night, Veronica wrote in her journal, "They think this is about business. They think I am just a pawn. But they don't understand. This is personal. I will not stop until Maya feels what I felt. The world will see her stumble, and when she does, I will be there to watch." Meanwhile, the attacks grew bolder. Hackers targeted Maya's foundation, leaking manipulated documents that suggested corruption. Anonymous voices online spread conspiracies about her past. Even invitations to prestigious events began to waver, with organizers unsure whether her presence would inspire or scandalize. Jordan fought tirelessly, hiring investigators, lawyers, and cybersecurity experts. Yet the damage was already spreading faster than it could be contained. He watched his wife endure the storm with grace, but he also saw the weariness in her eyes when the cameras turned away. One evening, as the city lights glimmered below them, Maya whispered, "This isn't just about me, Jordan. It's about you too. Whoever is behind this doesn't want just my fall. They want yours." He tightened his grip around her hand. "Then we'll face them together." But even as he spoke, news broke of another scandal. A leaked video, edited to look as if Maya had mocked the very women she fought to uplift. It spread like wildfire, millions believing it before the truth could be checked. For the first time, Maya felt the ground beneath her shake. In her heart, she knew the fight was no longer just about dignity. It was about survival. And far away, Veronica stood before a mirror, her reflection lit by candlelight. She raised a glass of champagne to her own image and whispered, "Now she knows what it feels like." But what Veronica didn't realize was that she, too, was walking into a storm, one that would eventually consume everything she thought she had regained. The game was no longer about a slap or even about pride. It had become a war of truth versus deception, of love versus vengeance. And as the world watched, none could predict who would stand when the dust finally settled. The winter air over Manhattan carried a bite, sharp and cold, as if the city itself sensed what was coming. On the 27th floor of the Allison Tower, Maya sat in her office, a mountain of documents spread before her. She had faced storms before, but this one was different. The smear campaign was no longer whispers in gossip columns. It had matured into a coordinated assault, stretching across continents, news networks, and even government halls. Jordan entered, his face weary. He tossed a newspaper onto her desk. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Ellison Foundation under investigation for fraud." Maya read it slowly, her pulse steady even as her stomach tightened. She knew the truth, but truth didn't matter to a world hungry for scandal. She closed the paper and met Jordan's eyes. "They want me to break," she said softly. Jordan walked to the window, his reflection in the glass fractured by city lights. "It isn't just about breaking you, Maya. They want me out of the game. My company has projects that threaten their interests, new technologies, cleaner energy, things that would cost them billions if I succeed. You're the easiest part to me." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Maya stood, her shoulders squared. "Then we fight, not just for us, but for everyone who believes in us." But while they prepared their defense, Veronica Kingsley was savoring her triumph. She sat in a Parisian cafe, sipping her espresso, watching news anchors dissect Maya's every word. Her patrons, businessmen with old money, politicians with shadowy agendas, had delivered her tools, and she wielded them with ruthless precision. And yet, deep inside, Veronica felt a gnawing emptiness. Victory tasted bitter when it was stolen, and though the world blamed Maya, Veronica knew the war was not truly won. She wanted more. She wanted Maya ruined not just in headlines, but in spirit. So she crafted her most dangerous plan yet. Through intermediaries, she funneled money to an investigative journalist desperate for fame. Leaked evidence of secret offshore accounts was planted. Photographs were doctored, showing Maya at private parties she had never attended. Slowly, threads of lies were woven into a tapestry so convincing that even longtime allies began to falter. Within weeks, politicians who had once stood beside Maya quietly stepped away. Donors paused their funding. Invitations to global forums vanished. And one evening, as Maya prepared to address a group of young scholars, she was stopped at the door. A security officer, eyes downcast, murmured, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellison. The organizers have requested you not speak tonight. Too much controversy." Maya smiled faintly, thanked him, and walked back to her car without protest. But inside, she felt the sharp sting of betrayal. In the car, Jordan reached for her hand. She turned to him and whispered, "This is bigger than us, isn't it? They don't want just our silence. They want our erasure." Jordan's jaw tightened. "Yes, and that means we need allies they don't expect." The next day, Jordan reached out to an old friend, a retired intelligence officer who owed him a favor. If the attacks were as coordinated as they seemed, they weren't just gossip wars, they were strategic operations, the kind governments use to topple rivals. If they could trace the lies back to their source, maybe they could expose the puppeteers. Meanwhile, Veronica received a message from her patrons. "You've done well, but now you must step aside. Leave the rest to us." Her pride flared. She hadn't come this far to be discarded. She realized, too late, that she was not their equal. She was their pawn. But pawns with ambition can be the most dangerous pieces on the board, and Veronica vowed she would not be left behind. So, while the businessmen plotted in boardrooms and politicians whispered in marble halls, Veronica began her own secret campaign. She hired her own private investigator, not to attack Maya, but to dig into the very men who thought they controlled her. And what she uncovered was darker than she ever imagined. Offshore empires of wealth, illegal arms deals, and secret alliances stretching from London to Dubai. Suddenly, she saw the game for what it was. It wasn't about Maya anymore. It wasn't even about Jordan. It was about a global web of power, and she was caught in the middle. For the first time, Veronica felt a chill of fear. Across the ocean, Maya stood on her balcony, gazing at the night sky. "They've tried to silence me," she whispered, "but I will not disappear." She thought of the girls she had mentored, of the letters filled with gratitude and hope. She thought of the slap that had started it all, how a moment of cruelty had awakened a fight for dignity she had never asked for but could no longer abandon. And far below, in the streets of New York, unseen forces moved. Men in suits met in quiet restaurants. Anonymous packages exchanged hands. Every side prepared for what was coming, because this was no longer a scandal. The snow fell heavy over the city that night, blanketing Manhattan in silence. From the top floor of the Ellison Tower, the world looked serene, untouched, But inside the walls of Jordan and Maya's life, the storm raged louder than ever. Jordan sat in his private study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk. Across from him, his old friend, the retired intelligence officer named Marcus Vale, sifted through files spread across a leather-bound folder. His eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that had seen battlefields and betrayals most men couldn't imagine. "This isn't gossip anymore," Marcus said finally. "This is structured disinformation. Every thread leads back to shell corporations, offshore trusts, and media assets controlled by the same circle of men. Whoever is behind this, they played this game for decades. They know how to bury truth under layers of lies." Jordan leaned back, his jaw tightening. "And Veronica—" Marcus flipped another page. A grainy surveillance photo showed her leaving a French chateau, laughing with men whose names carried weight in both politics and crime. "She thinks she's in control. She isn't. They are using her anger as a weapon. But pawns don't stay pawned forever. Either she'll be discarded, or she'll turn reckless." Jordan's mind returned to Maya, asleep in the next room. She had endured everything: headlines, whispers, public humiliation, and yet she had not once faltered in her dignity. He envied her strength, even as he feared it would soon be tested beyond measure. Meanwhile, in Paris, Veronica Kingsley sat alone at her vanity, the glow of candlelight flickering across her face. The documents her investigator had uncovered lay scattered around her, evidence of corruption so deep it could bring down governments. She should have felt victorious, but instead, unease coiled in her chest. She picked up a photograph, Maya and Jordan at a charity gala, smiling, unaware of her presence in the shadows at night. Veronica's fingers trembled. She whispered to herself, "Why does she haunt me? Why can't I let her go?" For all her plotting, Veronica realized a truth she had never admitted aloud. The slap, that public humiliation, had not just been about pride. It had awakened something deeper in her, a mirror of everything she envied: Maya's poise, her respect, her love. And envy, once planted, grows like poison. But envy can also turn to obsession. Back in New York, Maya walked into the foundation offices to find chaos. Reporters crowded outside, donors canceled pledges, and staff whispered with fear. One young assistant, barely out of college, clutched a folder to her chest and said, "Mrs. Listen, they say the FBI is looking into us. Is it true?" Maya placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "The truth will come out," she said firmly. "And when it does, we'll stand taller than ever." Her words carried conviction, but deep inside, a seed of doubt had begun to take root. That night, she found herself unable to sleep. She walked through the penthouse halls, her mind restless. Standing at the window, she whispered into the dark, "If they want war, then I'll give them one." Unknown to her, in a high-rise across the city, another figure watched her through binoculars. A hired operative, silent and patient, reported into an earpiece, "Target secure. Orders." The voice on the other end, one of Veronica's new patrons, replied, "Observe. Not yet, but when the time comes, she must know fear." The city slept, unaware of the battle lines being drawn above it, and somewhere in that silence, Veronica made her choice. She would no longer wait for others to dictate the war. She would take control of the game herself, even if it meant burning every bridge, even if it meant stepping into the fire she had lit. Because in her mind, there was only one end to this story: Maya Ellison brought to her knees. But destiny, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. The winter storms passed, but the city remained restless. For weeks, Maya kept her head high, attending meetings, appearing at charity events, and refusing to vanish from the public eye. Yet behind the calm surface, her world was fraying thread by thread. Rumors spread faster than truth. Every morning brought a new headline, each more vicious than the last. Some claimed she had used her foundation's funds to buy luxury estates abroad. Others accused her of secretly running political campaigns through shell organizations. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when lies sold papers and clicks. Jordan spent sleepless nights in his office, poring over spreadsheets, reports, and surveillance logs. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO anymore. He was a man defending his wife's honor, his empire, his very legacy. Marcus Vale, his trusted ally, warned him, "You can't fight shadows with fists. You need light. Expose them, and they'll scatter. But exposure meant war, and Jordan knew that once begun, it would leave no one untouched. Meanwhile, Maya faced battles of her own. At a gala meant to honor women in leadership, she walked into the ballroom to find whispers already circulating. Faces that once greeted her with warmth now turned cold, some smiling with pity, others with concealed delight at her supposed fall. Yet when she stood at the podium, her voice carried across the hall with unwavering strength. "I am not here because of what they say about me," she declared, her eyes sweeping the room. "I am here because of what I do. And what I will continue to do is fight for those who cannot stand for themselves. No lie can take that away from me." The applause was thunderous, but so too was a backlash. The next morning, headlines twisted her words, painting her as arrogant, out of touch, even dangerous. Across the ocean, Veronica read those articles with a smile. Her champagne glass glittered under the Paris lights. She was not alone. The men in dark suits who had made her their accomplice now saw her as useful. They promised her influence, wealth, and redemption in the circles that had once banished her. But Veronica's heart was not at peace. Each victory against Maya felt hollow. At night, she dreamed of the slap, that sharp sound echoing across marble floors, the stunned silence of the crowd, Maya's eyes wide not with anger but with pity. That look haunted her more than the act itself. Still, obsession drove her forward. She began funding private investigators to dig deeper into the Allisons' past. She scoured through old records, searching for anything, a secret, a weakness, a scandal that could not be denied. And then she found something. A file buried deep in a European archive, marked with Jordan's name. Its contents were not yet clear, but Veronica's pulse quickened as she read the first lines. If what she held was real, it could destroy not only Maya's reputation but Jordan's empire in one stroke. Back in New York, Maya sensed a shift. She didn't know what was coming, but she felt it, like the stillness before lightning splits the sky. Her intuition told her that this was no longer about rumors or reputations. Someone wanted them broken completely. That night, she stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her hair, the city glowing below. Jordan joined her, his face lined with exhaustion. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Regret what?" she replied. "Choosing me. This life. All the battles that come with my name." Maya turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I chose you because I saw the man behind the empire. And no scandal, no smear, no enemy can change that." He kissed her hand, but his heart was heavy, for he knew that love alone might not be enough to protect them from what was coming. Far away, in Paris, Veronica closed the file with trembling hands. "Finally," she whispered, "finally, I have the weapon." And so, the war entered its darkest chapter yet, one where secrets buried for decades threatened to rise, and where envy, power, and love would collide with consequences no one could escape. The world didn't pause, but for Maya, time seemed to stretch into something heavy, something fragile. Each day she woke to flashing headlines. Each night she closed her eyes to the weight of whispers she could not silence. Yet despite everything, she moved with the same grace she had always carried, not because she was untouched, but because she refused to let them see her break. Jordan, however, carried the cracks. His empire was steady in the eyes of the public, but behind the polished glass of his boardroom, dissent had begun to brew. Investors whispered of risks, partners questioned loyalty, and a few old rivals sensed weakness. A billion-dollar company did not fall overnight, but erosion always began at the edges. Marcus Vail knew this better than anyone. He had lived long enough to see empires topple not from war but from whispers. He placed another thick folder on Jordan's desk, his voice low and edged with warning. "This isn't just Veronica in the mall," Marcus said. "She's opened the door to people you don't want sitting across from you. Politicians, oligarchs, old families with more power than law itself. They see Maya as your shield, and if they can shatter her, they can get to you." Jordan rubbed his temples. "So what do we do? Fight them all?" Marcus gave him a hard look. "No, we fight smart. You don't win against shadows by chasing them. You force them into the light." But bringing shadows into the light was dangerous work. Meanwhile, Maya tried to hold on to normalcy. She threw herself into the foundation, into meeting mothers struggling to put food on the table, into listening to students who dreamed of futures bigger than their neighborhoods. These moments kept her grounded, reminded her why she had endured the scrutiny in the first place. One afternoon, after speaking at a community center in Brooklyn, Maya was approached by an elderly woman with weathered hands and eyes that carried both sorrow and pride. "Don't let them take you down, child," the woman said, clutching Maya's hand. "They are scared of women who don't bow. That means you're doing something right." Maya smiled warmly, but her chest tightened, because she knew that courage had a cost, and the bill was coming due. Across the Atlantic, Veronica sat in a candlelit dining room with her new allies. The men who surrounded her were not ordinary power brokers. They were the kind of men whose names never appeared in papers, but whose influence could shift elections and economies. They studied her carefully, weighing whether she was a pawn or something more. Veronica leaned forward, her voice sharp, rehearsed, yet laced with sincerity. "You all underestimated her," she said, sliding the file across the table. "Maya Ellison is not just a philanthropist's wife. She is a symbol of his empire. Remove her, and Jordan will crumble. He will spend everything protecting her. He will burn his fortune trying to save her reputation. That's how you break him." The men exchanged glances, their silence heavy with interest. One of them finally spoke. "And this document? You're sure it's authentic?" Veronica's lips curled into a smile. "It's more than authentic. It's the one truth he cannot bury." But when she returned to her suite that night, Veronica felt no triumph. She poured herself another glass of wine, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at her was tired, hollow, and yet alive in a way it hadn't been for years. Obsession had become her heartbeat. Back in New York, Jordan found himself staring at his own reflection late into the night. He remembered the first time he had met Maya, not at a gala or an event, but in the simplest of places, a bookstore cafe. She had been reading a novel, laughing quietly at a passage, unaware that the most powerful man in the room had already fallen for her. Now that same woman, the one who had reminded him of the joy beyond wealth, was being dragged through fire, and he would not let her stand alone. "I don't care what it costs," he whispered into the darkness. "I'll burn the world before I let them touch her." But far below their penthouse windows, the city churned with forces neither of them could see. Private operatives tracked their movements. Journalists, bought and paid for, sharpened their pens. And in the quietest corners, whispers grew louder. A scandal was coming, a revelation that could shatter everything they had built. And Veronica, standing at the center of it all, prepared to light the match. Because in her mind, nothing mattered anymore but the fall of Maya Ellison. Yet destiny had a cool sense of irony, for in the depths of the file she thought she controlled lay truths even she did not yet understand, truths that could consume not just Maya and Jordan, but Veronica herself. The war was no longer about pride. It was about survival, and survival always demands a sacrifice. The days blurred into one another, but the storm did not fade, it only grew heavier. For Maya, each morning began with a new wound, a new headline cutting deeper than the last. Her name was no longer Hayes. It was a weapon wielded by strangers who had never spoken to her but claimed to know her heart. One evening, she sat by the fire in their penthouse, the glow soft against her skin. Jordan entered, jacket still on, his face lined with exhaustion. He had spent the day in back-to-back meetings, but there was no peace to bring home. "They are planning something bigger," he said, dropping a folder on the coffee table. "Anonymous tips, rumors that feel too polished to be accidents. And Marcus's team has traced some of the funding back to show companies in Europe." Maya looked up, her brows tightening. "Europe, Veronica." Jordan nodded grimly. "She's not working alone anymore. And what worries me most isn't what they've done, it's what they're about to release. They are holding something back, waiting for the perfect moment." Maya leaned back, her eyes on the flickering fire. "For a long time," she said nothing. Then, softly, "You always told me the higher you climb, the more people want to pull you down. But I didn't realize they'd want to bury us." Jordan knelt beside her, taking her hand. His grip was steady, but his voice carried a weight he rarely revealed. "They won't bury us. I won't let them. But we have to be ready for whatever's inside that file." Miles away, Across the ocean, Veronica studied the same file with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, photographs, records. Some real, some doctored so seamlessly even experts would struggle to tell the difference. They painted a picture of Maya that were both damning and irresistible to the hungry press, a woman who had supposedly manipulated charity funds for personal gain, who had allegedly lied about her past. But deeper inside the file, hidden among the chaos, was something Veronica had not fully understood. A single sealed envelope marked with initials she did not recognize. She had dismissed it at first, assuming it was nothing. Yet every time she looked at it, unease stirred in her chest. Still, she pressed forward. Patience, one of her European allies told her over dinner. The public needs to be softened before the killing blow. Let the smaller scandals build. Then, when their defenses are weakest, release everything. Veronica smiled, raising her glass, though her hand shook ever so slightly. Back in New York, Maya returned to the Foundation office late at night, long after her staff had gone home. She walked through the quiet halls, past photos of children smiling, past murals of families whose lives had changed because of her work. She paused in front of one picture, a young girl, no older than 10, beaming as she held a scholarship certificate. Maya whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "This is why I can't fall." But even as she whispered, her phone buzzed. An anonymous message appeared on the screen. "We know who you really are. The world will know soon enough." Her blood ran cold. Not because of the words, but because whoever had sent them knew exactly where she was at that moment. The next morning, Jordan doubled security. Marcus Vale assigned teams not just to follow the Alyssans, but to track the trackers, shadows watching shadows. Yet the more layers they added, the more elusive the threat became. And then, without warning, the first strike landed. A news network released a special report filled with selective leaks from the file. They accused Maya of funneling money through offshore accounts, implying corruption at the very heart of her foundation. No proof, only fragments, but fragments were enough. The story spread like wildfire. Investors panicked, donors withdrew. Within hours, the Alyssans were no longer just targets of whispers. They were front-page news. As cameras swarmed the foundation gates, Maya stood inside, calm on the surface, trembling within. She thought of the little girl's photograph, of the mothers she had promised hope to. She thought of the woman who had whispered, "Don't let them take you down, child." She would not. But as Veronica watched the chaos unfold on her television in Paris, she laughed through tears. For the first time, she felt victorious. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the sealed envelope inside the file contained a truth far deadlier than any of the lies. A truth that, once opened, would not just wound Maya, but would consume everyone who touched it. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had arrived, and survival would demand more than wealth, more than power. It would demand sacrifice. The fallout was immediate. Reporters camped outside the Alyssans' home. Protesters, stirred by half-truths online, gathered at the Foundation's offices with angry signs. Overnight, Maya went from being celebrated as a visionary to painted as a thief. Yet inside the storm, she stood straighter than ever. When her advisors urged her to hide, she refused. "If I vanish," she told them, "then they win. They don't want truth. They want silence. And I will not give them silence." Still, her resolve carried a heavy price. Former allies avoided her calls. Journalists who once praised her now wrote scathing op-eds. Even some staff members resigned, afraid their careers would sink with haze. Jordan watched her fight with quiet fury, his own empire threatened by the constant blows. Late one night, Jordan met privately with Marcus Vale in his study. The curtains were drawn, the city lights hidden. Marcus laid a folder on the desk. "We traced the funding for the leaks. Some of it ties back to Veronica, yes, but she's not smart enough to orchestrate this scale alone. There's someone bigger in play, someone feeding her, protecting her." Jordan's jaw tightened. "Corporate rivals." Marcus shook his head. "Not just rivals. Old enemies. People who see you both as symbols to destroy." Jordan leaned back, eyes narrowing. He had built his empire brick by brick, but he had also collected enemies with every rise. Now, they had found the perfect weapon, his wife. Meanwhile, Maya was living her own battle. She returned to the foundation despite the chaos, walking into a storm of cameras. Inside, she gathered the remaining staff, though still loyal, their faces pale with fear. "I know what you've heard," she began, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I know you're afraid, but I need you to remember why we're here. This foundation is bigger than me, bigger than any headline. We save lives. We give hope, and I will not let lies destroy that. Neither should you." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then slowly, one by one, heads nodded. A small flicker of courage reignited among them. But outside the walls, Veronica was tightening the noose. She met with her European allies in a lavish salon in Paris, her laughter sharp as crystal. "You see," she said, gesturing at the headlines. "She's crumbling. The mighty Maya brought down by her own hypocrisy." Yet deep down, Veronica's smile was fragile. The sealed envelope from the file still haunted her. At night, she would open the drawer where it was hidden, her fingers tracing the flap, her breath quickening. She never opened it. Not yet. Something about it terrified her, though she couldn't explain why. Back in New York, a darker threat loomed. The anonymous messages to Maya grew bolder. "You should have stayed silent. We know what's in the file. The world will not forgive you." Security traced some messages to overseas servers, others to places shockingly close, a cafe down the street, a library she had once visited. Whoever was behind it was not just powerful. They were watching her, step by step. One evening, as Maya left a charity dinner, a protester broke past security, hurling red paint across her gown. Cameras flashed, capturing her frozen in crimson. For a split second, the world saw not the billionaire's wife, not the graceful leader, but a hunted woman under siege. That image spread faster than any headline before. When she returned home, Jordan was waiting, fury radiating from him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "They won't stop until they break you." Maya's eyes were glossy but fierce. "Then we make sure they break first." And so a new strategy was born. They would no longer wait for attacks. They would go on the offensive. Marcus was given full rein to investigate, no matter the cost. Jordan began leveraging his global network of allies, some in places where favors were owed and debts could be collected. Still, the questions haunted Maya at night. Who had orchestrated this? Why her, when Jordan was the one with the empire? And what on earth was in that sealed envelope that seemed to hold the heart of it all? In Paris, Veronica poured herself another glass of wine, staring at the envelope as though it could speak. Finally, with trembling hands, she tore it open and froze, her face drained of color. Her hands shook violently, the glass tumbling from her grip and shattering across the floor. She whispered, "No, this can't be true." But it was, and whatever she had just read would change everything.